became one of the final classic Christmas episodes for me to review for this month, not to mention that this wasn't originally a part of my plans, but at the same time, I really went through a lot of stress throughout this month. And believe it or not, I really felt like that this is like the closest for me to find any interest into reviewing, knowing full well that the ones that I rejected were really low. But if there's one thing to point out is that Codename Kids Next Door is a show that is difficult for me to get back into when it comes to its qualities. The last time I talked about this show was part of Summerpalooza 3 last year, and judging of how I reviewed a beach episode, even though that wasn't really a beach episode, it's mostly a water tube race episode at most. This episode nearly caught my attention the most, knowing full well of how memorable it is. Mainly the fact that for how it handled Christmas, unlike the other Christmas episodes that I have talked about this month, including the previous years, this episode really aged a lot more after 17 years, which is saying a lot. This Christmas episode begins with Codename Kids Next Door heading to the North Pole in order to do the mission involving Christmas. But apparently, if you really think that they're willing to knock out the elves inside Santa's workshop, then I really thought really differently when I watched this episode for the first time, because I honestly thought that they were the actual main characters and not the villains that we've all remembered after watching this show. I'm just saying, as much as that this show was way ahead of its time, it didn't change to the fact that we were still kids and we didn't think clearly when it comes to the episodes like this. The only thing that I've witnessed is that number 3 has gifts for his friends, but apparently the other characters didn't have gifts whatsoever, not only to themselves, but also to number 3. For me personally, I honestly thought that number 3 was deranged when I first watched these episodes at a young age, but when I got older and older, it really shows that her anger, temper is mostly done correctly. In this one, she has every right for what she did towards the end of this episode. Anyway, due to the misunderstanding from the beginning, Wintergreen and his team are attacking Sector V, and for me personally, the fact that I've remembered these characters upon watching this episode again really goes to show that they're not the actual villains. It just goes to show that it was all a misunderstanding, and the action sequences in the middle of the episode showcase of what this world building of Christmas is like in Codename Kids Next Door. Not to mention that the episode itself is taking place in a comic book. So apparently Christmas and comic books mushed together is honestly a good combination, and I don't think that any future episode involving Christmas from any other show would ever take inspiration for what Kids Next Door did, since that they're the first to do it. If I'm gonna be perfectly honest, if this show continued, or at least get another Christmas episode, then I'm pretty sure that these characters will return in Allies of Sector V, that is. But then again, it's mostly me just thinking about possibilities over a show that is 2 decades old. After the battle where Wintergreen's team won, the gift that number 3 was originally going to give to number 4 is a Christmas rainbow monkey, which is only limited during Christmas Eve, which is also the day where the fraud Sector V went to the North Pole at Santa's workshop. And with the delightful children taking over the machinery in Santa's workshop, nearly every single person around the world is gonna get caught while the delightful children get all the gifts. This is honestly one of the most heinous things that any other person, or naughty person, or naughty people in this case, would do. But this is also a lesson: if you ask for too much, you'll become this. If I'm gonna be perfectly honest with you, when I first watched this at a young age, I was mostly confused. I wasn't even traumatized. Like, confusion can be a lot more common above trauma in some cases. I mean, say all you want that this traumatized you as a kid, but for me personally, I was mostly confused other than just giving Sector V a chance to save Christmas. And if those substitute teachers managed to stop Sector V when they had the chance, I would have probably be a lot more confused of what the outcome would have been like if the villains won. I'm being really honest with you of how confusion this show is when I watched at a very young age, to the point that I was more confused than the bits where it can instantly offended adults of the fact that they're evil in this show while kids are superior. I was really at a bad place when I watched this show. To be honest, when I first watched this episode back then, I always think of kids saving Christmas and nothing more, and while yes, that this episode is all about saving Christmas from the enemies, for me personally, rewatching this episode really felt like that it was a lot more serious than comedic. I mean, granted, once we get into the ending involving number 3, I always look at this episode mostly of what Codename Kids Next Door was like when I first watched it, along with Ed and Eddie, SpongeBob, and other shows involving Nickelodeon or Cartoon Network. And the secrets involving the kids getting the code due to the delightful children in number 3, I really felt sad for them, knowing forward that they don't deserve it. And yet, at the same time, whenever I see the delightful children in number 3 doing their own thing, it would probably be a lot more disturbing of what the outcome would have been like I said earlier. And the thing is, this show was a lot more different compared to the other shows, which isn't on the same lengths as Adventure Time or Regular Show or any of the shows that came out in the 2010s. Since that this show was a 2000s Cartoon Network show, I couldn't relate to any of the characters in this show. And I'm not being exaggerated, because as much as the characters are still likable, that doesn't automatically mean that I was fully related to them, especially since I did not have a favorite out of the 5, mainly Sector V, number 1s through 5. And while I understand that when you get older, you will understand more and more after watching more episodes from the show, but at the same time, it's really difficult to look at the qualities in this show knowing full well of how your viewpoint from the show just isn't the same compared to the other shows that you grew up with way more than Codename Kids Next Door. I'm not saying that those shows overshadow this show, but when it centers around Christmas in this episode, it's just mostly what I expect from the show to do. Just tackle the idea of loving the holidays and just trying to do something serious most of the time. And for me personally, whenever I see seriousness in this show, I wasn't really prepared for seriousness in the 2000s. Then again, I would have been the nutcracker in this episode, since I was 7 when this episode aired. I'm just saying. But getting back into the qualities of this episode after 17 years, rewatching this episode involving number 3 and her relationship with number 4, or vice versa, it really goes to show that she became one of the most likable characters in the show. And this was before the internet was mainstream. And for me personally, if this show was in the mainstream situation like every other shows in the modern times, I'm pretty sure that our viewpoints towards this show would have been a lot more different, because we can actually express our opinions towards the characters. And for me personally, number 3's character in this show, along with the episodes that she appears in, my perspective has changed drastically, because I was mostly confused, but now rewatching these episodes and remembering one of the most infamous moments, for better or worse, I really felt like that she gets a lot of slack ever since the 2000s came around. And considering that number 4 was one of those characters that were the closest to make number 3 happy at some times, or the opposite, I really felt like that this entire episode focusing on number 3 and number 4 slightly really sums up of what the ending is like when number 3 was going to have all the gifts, since that she wasn't appreciative by not getting any gifts from any one of her friends. While this close on getting all the gifts, number 4 gave number 3 his Christmas gift to her, which is an half-eaten container of french fries from the Rusty Burger. For me personally, it's not really the best gift, but for how that this scene is executed, number 3 went back to her joyful self because she got a gift from someone. If you ask me, this is supposed to be a humorous joke that isn't supposed to be taken seriously, but if you look at it at a shipping point of view, it really felt a lot more heartwarming than it was, considering that number 4 saved Christmas by giving number 3 a gift. Apparently, this episode's lesson is that you better give someone a gift no matter what. Otherwise, you'll become number 3. Unless if you're a kid, that is, and not a teenager or adult. And for me personally, if I ask most of these examples, I will probably question a lot more about the world building of the show rather than the heartwarming moment between number 3 and number 4. I'm just saying, it's a good scene, but at the same time, it's supposed to be taken as a joke. When it comes to this show's version of Santa, it really goes to show that even as an adult, he isn't a terrible adult. He is the same Santa that we've all known from the other Christmas episodes from other shows, and I have to say that he is criminally underrated for how he is executed. The fact that the Delightful Children just uses his invention, that instead of just going to house with reindeers, he has this huge dome room, or whatever you call it, that uses magic to send the gifts to the children around the world. Well, it goes to show that Santa's workshop is a lot more advanced in this compared to the other workshops that I've seen in other cartoons. In my opinion, this episode was a lot more better than I remember it, but considering that I have watched a couple episodes from this show and it got me slightly interested, this was honestly a close second into being replaced by a different Christmas episode. And for me personally, it was this close to taking second place or a different position of not being reviewed entirely. But I guess miracles do happen towards shows when it comes to hidden gems. And for me personally, this is a hidden gem, but I don't say that it's one of the biggest hidden gems out there. So I'm giving this episode a 7 out of 10, and regardless if I'm never going to get back to this show in the near future, keep in mind you're probably not going to enjoy my point of view of the episodes involving characters I haven't discussed, but like I said, this show just isn't one of my favorite Cartoon Network shows back in the day. And think about it now, it's slightly better, but at the same time, it's way lower on reviewing material on my list, aside from the bad episodes. But when it comes to the good, only time will tell. But I will say that this Christmas episode is still definitely worth a watch at least once.